Right. Welcome back to our panel session. And for me, this is the most important part of these. The presentations are interesting. They kind of present facts out, but I love some of the nuance and detail that come out of the different panel sessions that we have. We had a really engaging panel session yesterday, and I'm sure with this group, we'll have an equally engaging panel session today as well. So in no particular order, we have Ben Asveen from BT. We have Yvonne from the, and I knew I was going to get this wrong, from the National Audit Office. We've also got Mark from SAP, and we've got Paul from Thales. So once again, a pretty heavyweight group of panelists to talk about digital transformation or business transformation. And I think we've had a number of questions come in, and the one question that seems to be coming out over and over again from different people is about this whole value for money thing in terms of any kind of transformation program. I remember from many years ago, mergers and acquisitions got a hammering because none of the mergers and acquisitions worked. There's a number of people, if you follow the stuff online, that's saying, well, all this digital transformation is just getting rid of people. Is there really a cost equation that can work in this space? So in terms of the large-scale transformations that we're seeing within industry, are we actually seeing value from money coming out of these huge changes in these organizations at the end of the day? And Mark, because you're at SAP, I'll start with you, because I know you're one of the underpinning engines in a lot of this digital transformation for industry. So I'd really like your perspective on that whole cost equation around transformation.
So, I mean, I think the simple answer is yes, there is value for money. I'm not sure it's all about reducing costs and improving productivity, right? I mean, a lot of what we talk about with customers, identifying new revenue opportunities and providing the flexibility for that business to be able to go after those revenue opportunities. So, it's always a balance in terms of, obviously what the level of investment is and how quickly they can get their returns. One of the things that we try to work with customers is time to value, right? That value can't come in 5-10 years, right? Historically, you've invested in an ERP system, it was a 20-year cycle, right? We need to see an immediacy in that. So we work very closely through our own consulting sort of colleagues as well as third parties to realize gains in months, right? Sometimes even weeks.
Great, thank you, Mark. And Yvonne, pretty much the same question to you, but I'm sure obviously this is going to have a slight government slant on it, and I would argue you mentioned about change being glacial in government. But how is that whole cost equation actually managed in that kind of an environment?
I think costs are really interesting because if you look at government or any large organization and the existing running cost of its traditional legacy environment, you have not just the running of the systems, but a huge people cost associated with, in particular, joining up data from unjoined up systems. So there's a huge cost in terms of running the outdated, potentially, technology when modern technology could be cheaper. But you also have a lot of people in these large organizations that have to have mechanisms for pulling out data together, pulling out data from different systems to create another view of that data. That's an enormous people cost, and that cost is never properly it's never properly evaluated or identified. So there is a big cost issue, and I think your point about is digital transformation just about reducing costs? I think that's one of the points I tried to make in my transformation, which says, if you just keep doing, if organizations keep just doing tactical changes, then they are still running that costly legacy environment. They are still running those numbers of people, pulling that data together. They are just trying to do that in a a more streamlined way rather than real transformation, which is we need to do it differently, to do it more efficiently and be more cost effective. And that really is the difference between transformation and just making changes to your existing legacy operation, which is only going to ever give marginal value for money. I take Mark's point about you can create new services on top of legacy for private sector businesses that could add extra value to the organization. But if it's merely something that's increasing, customer satisfaction without really having those tangible business benefits, then even that isn't really adding a lot of value for money.
Great. Thanks, Yvonne. And Paul, same question to you, because my working assumption here is, Thales is a huge consumer of huge amounts of data in terms of the systems and tools and such. I mean, how does that whole cost-benefit analysis work in an organization the size and scope of Thales?
Well, I would agree with Mark, actually. I think trying to put a financial value on it probably is too simplistic. I mean, we have very complex connected ERP, PLM systems. We see, increasingly over the last few years, the importance of understanding the vulnerabilities in supply chain and really having really informative data systems that help us to understand that. We need also to understand, where we are in terms of regulatory compliance, for example, where the checking things when you ship them to different countries would now require an awful lot of information to be sifted through. So I think these information systems, the back office type systems, are increasingly important to us, and in fact, from a company that's quite complex, putting them all together under one unified ERP PLM system is quite important for us as well, rather than have multiple systems where it's not so easy to join these things up. I would also say that I spoke a little bit earlier around what we're doing in the customer-facing sense, but an awful lot of the data analytics and work we do with our chief data officer is focused in the back office, how we can improve things, how we can use robotic process automation to try and take the sort of transactional cost out of human beings doing things. But does it actually mean people losing jobs? No, we're transferring them to do more value-added activities and get the transactional things to be done by automated systems.
Okay, great, thank you. And Ben, same kind of thing to you. I mean, I know you're working in the cyberspace, but I suspect there's more of a potential cost issue to companies if they don't get the cyber stuff right than there is this whole cost-benefit debate. But I mean, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I think this is a question that has always been asked about security. It's not a new question. 20, 30 years ago, people were asking, well, how much should I spend on security and so on. I think people aren't asking that so much these days, because I think security and cybersecurity has become a board issue. And I think people do understand the cost of lack of security very well because of the recent attacks that we've had. So, the cost is anywhere between, for small company, anywhere between $1 million per attack to up to hundreds of millions for much larger breaches. So I think it is. I mean, my conversation with CEOs and CTOs is it's much cheaper to invest in security than to get attacked. I think that is understood. The difficulty is, well, how much? And I think that, again, goes back to what the other speakers were saying. It's not a simple equation to say, okay, if I spend £1 here, I'll get £1.50 back. I think that is a much more complicated equation around, well, do you want to, what's the impact of disruption to your service? What's the impact on customer satisfaction? What's the impact on trust in your services and so on? And I think in that sense, the conversation is not, is it good to invest in security? The question is, how much more should we invest in security?
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. I knew you was going to say that, actually, but yeah, we've had this discussion in the past, actually, in this area. So there's one of the other questions is around the data, because I know there was a kind of a common thread, not only in yesterday's session, but today's session as well, about the use of data in this particular space around a transformation. Kevin Lee from BT touched on it a bit earlier on about consolidating the range of data to where it could be managed more effectively to get insights. But I guess, I mean, it clearly plays an important role, but how can we use this data then to connect to the organization and the employees in that organization to where they understand actually what's going on here, other than just saying we're consolidating all of our data to get insights from it at the end of the day? It's a big task. I mean, I work in a big organization. There's lots of change going on. But I would argue I don't always fully understand the impact that data may have on what I'm doing in my day job. How do we get that message out? How do we connect that to people across huge organizations that may see it again as just change for change's sake at the end of the day? And Yvonne, if you don't mind, because it's once again with the government angle, I'll kind of start with you with that one.
Yes, and I think again we're looking at the difference between data in traditional organizations and data in startups. Data in startups are tight, up to date. They are designed in a way to capture and store that data so that it's easy to apply analytics, it's easy to interrogate it. In traditional organizations, when you have that data in all kinds of siloed systems that were built back in the day for their own business purposes, consolidating that data is a huge task. And there's lots of conversations that happen about, well, you know, you can use APIs, and yeah, you can, but even with APIs, you have to trust the source of that data that you are trying to link to via an API. So data analytics are hugely beneficial, but when we talk to a lot of the data scientists and data analytics, and again, this is both in government and in the traditional businesses with legacy, a lot of that time of those data scientists can spend 80% of their time actually re-engineering the data, trying to pull it together before they can apply their tools. So personal data in particular, of course, is the key issue. And therefore, when you have that kind of situation with the data, if you're trying to overlay something like AI, for instance, on that, and you can't, and you don't really have an excellent source of data that has got accuracy and integrity, and you want to apply AI to it, then what kind of results are you expecting to get? So legacy data, huge issue for traditional organizations. And getting that message across is really hard. And I think it gets mixed up with thinking about systems instead of thinking about data. Systems are the repository for that data. And if people could only think more about the actual data, it would make more sense in a business term, because at the moment they're trying to fathom out the system rather than the data.
Great, thanks, Yvonne. And Paul, at Talos, once again, I'm assuming you guys are huge consumers of data across your different systems, across your different divisions and so forth. How do you use that data in terms of making these changes or this transformation, but still connecting with the employees across Talos to get their engagement in this area?
Yeah, so I recognize many of the challenges that Yvonne mentioned, and we have been through quite a period of pulling together all our disparate systems into one. It was very, very time consuming. But what we do have now is a full data analytics suite for our systems. So, and any one of our employees, I can go to a dashboard now and bring up graphical displays of things like, you know, how many items we've shipped today to our customers, where they're going, where there are blockages in our systems, all sorts of on tap information from these very sort of graphical dashboards that we can now access. And it was very much part of that. But I also recognize that, you know, we would certainly come under the category of historical industry, and many of our systems, certainly in service with the military today, were designed and developed 20, 30 years ago and being maintained. So you have to have that long reach back into history for your data as well, not just the current stuff. And that generally is the challenge. But having really good dashboards, really good visualization of your data actually helps you fix its quality as well. You know, it's much easier to spot poor data when you can visualize it and do something about it. And we're certainly on that journey now of having got to the point where we can see our data, we can then start questioning, is it real, or is it a consequence of the data not being as good as it should be?
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And so, Ben, I'll come to you here in the studio on once again, broadly the same question about engaging with the people that use the systems, use the data. I mean, how do we get more people engaged in that process?
Mike, I think you have to talk about the benefits. I mean, I've been doing research for like 30 years, and I've always advocated that it's better to have access to more data, consolidate your data. And when I talk to people about the benefits of it, what they can do with it, then I don't see a lot of pushback and resistance. But of course, it's not that simple. I think, again, going back to my comfort zone, which is security, I think people, part of the reason why there's resistance because, you know, they don't want to lose control of that data. They don't want everybody to access the data. And from an organizational perspective, when you put all your data in one place, you actually make yourself more vulnerable to attacks and so on. So I think the strategy around describing the benefits has to go hand in hand with a proper strategy around, well, do we have role-based access control to that data? Can we allow access only to people who need access to certain parts of that data? And also, are we secure? Is the destination for that data, if it's a cloud-based service and so on, is it secure enough for the type of applications that we're looking at? So I think it's to do with giving people assurances that you are protecting that data and they're not losing complete control of that data, but at the same time talking about the benefits of looking at customer journey end to end, for example, you know, where you know, you don't have to go to 15 different people to get access to a processed Excel spreadsheet, which you then have to consolidate and so on. I think people understand the pain of doing that. If you explain the benefits to them, I don't think there'll be a lot of resistance.
Okay. Great, thanks, Ben. And Mark, you know, SAP is a major player in this, providing systems and services to large, you know, multinationals, governments, and so forth. How does SAP play this out, not only within your own organization, but when you're out having these discussions with other organizations as well?
I mean, the data, right, is what drives the value now for many organizations. But I think we also need to be a little bit careful, right? I mean, data needs some kind of context, right? So there's a lot of, we break this down in terms of you know, how do we make sure that, to Yvonne's point, right, you can connect to the right data sources in an effective way. So there's a data management and a data lifecycle requirement that you have, which your average consumer doesn't really care about, right? They're assuming that the data engineering that's going on within the organization provides them with trusted data sources, that it's been, you know, it's been normalized, it's associating to the right business transactions, right? So I think there's a data management piece, and obviously our product portfolio addresses that, but the real value comes from enriching the data, right? So how do we, you know, look at, I think to Ben's point, right, what's the business problem to solve, right? What's the business use case, right? That consumers of data are not looking for the data, right? They're looking for the information that helps them to make a better decision or to do their job more effectively. So you need to put it into the context of, you know, the business. And sometimes you're bringing, you know, data from multiple different systems where you need to align that, you need to integrate it, but then you need to ask new questions of it, right? And I think this is where we see the opportunity. It's not about delivering data to the end user. It's about providing new use cases or new business applications, right? I give an example, right? We're pulling data from across all spend categories for our customers so that they can get that unified view on spending. So hopefully, drive down cost if they need to, but also become more efficient and more productive. So I would break this down into, there's a data engineering or a data ops piece, right, where you need to put the infrastructure in place so that you have confidence over the data that you're delivering or the information that you're delivering to your consumers. And then there's a data consumption piece, right, which could be through a dashboard, it could be through, an analytic or a report, or it could be just through new use cases, or it could be automated, right, where it's driving decision-making within the systems without human interaction.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So basically what I'm hearing, and I've heard this said, by a number of people, data is the new oil, right? If you've got the data and you know how to use it effectively, you can get some really fantastic insights from it. I got a couple of other questions, more kind of on the people angle, and it's one of the questions that's come in online during the registration, and it has to do with the impact on people and maybe even employees at the end of the day about is all of this transformation, all of these systems, the new tools that come about as a consequence of this data availability, is this going to displace employees? Is it going to displace the human interaction? I know Ben and I have had discussions in the past about human in the loop on cybersecurity systems, but I guess do we see a major impact on the employee status of people, the work that they do, as well as how the man on the street may use this stuff as well? And Paula, can I start with you from a Thales perspective? Because I know a lot of your work in the MOD, this is changing some of the work in the MOD dramatically, because I do some work with the MOD as well around some of the systems they're deploying. It's my argument, it changes jobs, but there's still a fear out there is, will it displace people?
I don't. We certainly don't see that in our case. I mean, the one thing that's really important when you invest in new systems is also to invest in training. If you deploy new systems and don't train people on how to use them, then that is a real own goal. What we do find is that these systems make us more efficient. It frees people up to do other things. And I think there are very few people who really want to be in the situation that industries were in the not too distant past, where they had huge numbers of very complex Excel spreadsheets to juggle around. And frankly, the general impression from employees is when these systems are up and running and working well, they appreciate the fact that it gives them the time to do more value-added activities, which they find, they feel there's more worth in what they're doing, if you like, than fighting legacy systems that are very difficult to use. So it takes some of that frustration out of the workplace. And as I say, we certainly do need to make sure that the training element's there. And it does need people do need to be upskilled, and they do need to sort of pick up how to use the tools as part of the rollout.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paul. And Ben, I know we've discussed this topic on a number of occasions with customers. I mean, what's your take on this? Is cyber and some of the business transformation will become fully automated to where you don't need any people to actually manage it at the end of the day?
You know my view. I think because we have highly intelligent people behind some of the most sophisticated attacks, I don't think we can, until we reach that point where we have generalized AI systems, which we are not anywhere near, I think we're going to still need humans. I think the question then is, how can we deploy digital transformation, AI, data analytics to take humans 90%, 95% of the way, automate lots of number crunching, tedious data management tasks, and then bring humans in when the machines can't decide anymore. when you come up with lots of false positives, when you get to a point where there's a gray area between what's an attack, what's not an attack, and so on. So I think in cybersecurity, we certainly have a shortage of humans. And we need to train humans to work with future intelligent, automated systems that would help humans crunch through billions of data points on the network. Because humans can't do that. Let's face it, humans can't analyze billions of points per day. But they can look at a picture and say, this looks odd, right? So going back to the point that I think Paul made, visualization and bringing the human into the loop in our experience and in terms of our research shows that actually pragmatically, if you want to build accurate detection systems, you want to bring humans in the loop at certain points to guide the algorithm, to say this is what we want. And again, going back to the point made, we need to train people to work with AI systems rather than see them as a threat. That's in cybersecurity. But of course, some jobs will be replaced. Take car wash, for example, right? Car wash was done manually many, many years ago. Now you can have a car wash. Still, some people prefer the manual one. But so some tasks that can be automated will be automated, and some jobs that are purely consisting of those tasks obviously will disappear. But I don't see that as a major problem in cybersecurity, certainly, and I see more need for human judgment and human analysis in the cybersecurity space going forward.
Great, thanks, Ben. And Mark, from an SAP perspective, and what kind of dynamics are you seeing with this in terms of the human interaction and human engagement?
No, I would agree with the comments made, right? I think this is about augmenting, right? There's a lot more information. You made the point that it needs to be refined, right? And I think some of this can then be automated, but there are a lot of decision points that need to be made by humans, right? So this is about improving the quality of the employee to work on actually what's probably more relevant, right? Rather than doing the mundane. Providing them with a set of capabilities to understand where those false positives are so that they can bring their experience and insight to it. So I think it's about how we augment and enable people to become more productive and effectively do more. And then I think the other thing that is often ignored is there's a huge change management requirement here, right? I mean, Paul alluded to it, right? You need to change the way you do business to take advantage of this, right? I always remember back to my first job in the software industry back in the late 90s. We sold a great tool to businesses to help them build better products, but they built them in the same way. So they never actually got the benefit of this, right? So it's not just training. There's also an element of process change and change management that needs to happen to ensure that the companies get the benefit out of this. Otherwise, they're just gonna do more thing. They're gonna do the work. They're gonna do the wrong thing quicker, and probably will have more of a negative impact on the business.
Great, thanks, Mark. And Yvonne, you've got the same dynamic in government across different organizations. Once again, what kind of impact do you see here?
Yeah, I think that, we talked about the pace of change. We touched on the pace of change. It's slow. This is a really long journey in terms of organizations that are trying to transform. So in the short term, I don't actually see any need for anybody to be worrying about their jobs. I think, and also if you're transforming, there's going to be a period of you need the existing and then you need a lot of help doing the change. So, and that change is going to take a while. So I think this is, the jobs, lack of change is a future thing. I don't think it's really for now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Now, the next question I'm taking from the floor, so prepare yourselves. This is coming from Jerry Parr from the University of East Anglia. So, Jerry, what's your question?
Yeah, Mike, thank you very much. If you can hear me okay?
Can everybody hear him okay? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the general trend of change management and so on, and the value for money and the human in the loop. I just wondered to what extent we need to have better methodologies to leverage the domain knowledge that has been built up over many years in large organizations. In many ways, can we leapfrog some of the digital transformation strategies that we want to implement if we can really tap into that domain knowledge? Or is it a case that this hasn't got us too far, it's been dragging us back, it's a threat? So I just wondered to what extent the methodologies for extracting all the good domain knowledge that is built up in the organizations can be better leveraged to fast track some of the strategies we're trying to implement.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Jerry. Ben, can I start with you on that one? Because I know the cyber debate in companies is around do we or don't we, and what's the cost impact and at what scale. So how would you respond to Jerry's question about the legacy aspects of that?
It's a good question, Jerry. I think the change is not new to organization. I think you're right. There is a lot of research on that. There is always resistance to change. And when you look at the productivity of any new initiative, often it goes down before it goes up. And I think there's a lot of learning that we can bring from other decades into how we should move forward. What is different here is that the pace of change is much faster, and reskilling needs to take place a lot faster, and that's causing a lot of issues. So I think we can, so the answer to your question is yes, we can bring some of that learning through the changes that, let's face it, in the last 4 decades, computing has completely transformed. Organizations didn't look like this, people now sit at desks and do everything on the computer and so on. So we have a lot of data around how that change was managed and how long it took for humans to adapt. The problem is that now we have to adapt a lot faster. And humans are not a lot faster than they were 4 decades ago. So I think that's the challenge we need to overcome. We probably need more time given to people for retraining, for reskilling, for understanding advanced technologies. But then we have more resources too, right? So you can go on any search engine and get a brilliant TEDx video around any technology you want. I think it's about motivating people to want to change and then utilizing the learning from previous decades.
Great. And Paul, from a Thales perspective, I'm sure you guys have huge numbers of legacy systems. It's a company that's been around for a very long time. I mean, what would be your take to Jerry on this one?
Yeah, I mean, well, we've gone through this process of harmonizing some of those legacy systems, and certainly, in my interpretation of what the question is asking in terms of domain good practices, an awful lot of what we've done when we've tried to unify our systems is pick up the best practices that the individual businesses have brought to the table and said that's something that we should adopt and put into our procedures and embed in our systems as part of the overarching piece that we then do. So yes, it's definitely you can get some benefits, I think, by spotting the good practices that already exist in those disparate systems and then making them the standard for everyone. It isn't always easy, of course, because sometimes people think their system, their way of doing things is better than others. So it's not a straightforward thing to do. But we shouldn't always throw away good practice when we adopt new systems. We should, and that's certainly been one of the big aspects of our transformation that we've been doing, is to look at all the legacy processes and look and see where we have duplication and where we have good practice, and making sure we keep some of that in where we end up.
Great, thank you very much. And Mark, same question to you.
I'm a little bit conflicted here, right? Insofar as, I think about the change we've gone through from becoming an on-premise software provider to a cloud software provider. At the end of the day, we're still building software, but what was best practice as waterfall and delivering, product every 3 years is very different to agile and delivering product on a sometimes daily basis, right? So I think process change. So there is some inherent value in the domain expertise that exists, right? But there also has to be a willingness to adapt and to change, right? You know, sometimes there are very different requirements. Best practice sometimes equals workarounds, right? Because there wasn't a better way of doing it before. So, you know, yes, we need to look into the business to understand where that domain expertise, where that sort of understanding is, but then we need to also think, okay, how do we apply this in an effective way to get the benefits that we want, right? And back to my earlier point, right? You can give somebody a better tool and they'll just produce, you know, bad stuff quicker, right? Or create risk quicker for the business. So I think it's a balance. You need to do both, but I come back to the point I made before. This is a huge change management exercise as well if we're to be successful.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And Yvonne, I'm going to give you the last word on this one, and then we'll probably have to start thinking about bringing this session to a close.
I would agree actually with what Mark has just said. And I think when we're talking about methodologies, if we're talking about methodologies for change and we're talking about doing things faster, and that usually means an agile approach, that always worries me quite considerably, because if you're building products, and if this is a technology build, then agile approaches and methodologies are very well suited to that. When you're talking about business change, agile approaches in organizations that already don't fully understand how to do complex, large-scale change in a kind of architected and planned way, agile can be something that the organization assigns to. It's an excuse to skip out the business transformation and then say start building the web interface in an agile way. So I think my focus would be not so much in business transformation about doing it faster. I would say the focus has to be on doing it properly and really knowing how to do it and what you need to do to get there.
Great. Yvonne, thank you very much. And so much of that resonates with me about sometimes we're seeing change for the sake of change. Other times, we had a debate yesterday about the disconnect between the CXO level in organizations that are not tech savvy, just wanting things to happen, and then the tech savvy guy say, well, you can't do it that way, you have to do it this way, and it can cause all kinds of issues within organizations as they go around these transformations. I guess the final thing is, I think this is a series of debates and arguments that's going to run for years. There's still the debate about, is it business transformation or is it digital transformation, whatever you call it. But most organizations of any scale are in a continuous state of change. It's a case of best how you manage that at the end of the day. So I need to start bringing this session to a close. So I'd really like to thank the panelists and the speakers from today. Mark, Paul, Yvonne, and Ben, thank you very much for your inputs and for your contribution. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon on a future session. And as I bring this session to a close, we need 1 to 2 minutes to reset, and then we're going to have a call to action session from Alan Brown from DigiLab. But I'll see you there in a few minutes, and thank you all very much.